Today's show is sponsored by Cloud Zero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, Cloud Zero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, Cloud Zero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, Cloud Zero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. We are getting close to the end of August 2021 and another Sunday Perspective show. You know, this week, sometimes there's sort of big picture things that we try and cover on the Sunday show. And then once in a while, like we'll see an article, we'll see a headline, we'll see something kind of, bantered around in the community for the week that is kind of worth digging into a little bit because, on the surface, it seems like, oh, maybe it's not that big a deal. But then you sort of look at it and you go, okay, well, maybe it's, worth kind of looking at from the perspective of, are we at a tipping point? Are we at an inflection point, at a pivot point for the industry, for, cloud computing? And so what I thought I would do is this past week or so, there was an article written in Business Insider, which I'll put a link to. Sometimes it's behind a paywall, so you may not completely be able to get to it, but I'll try and summarize it as much as possible. And the headline was sort of clickbaity. It was said, the honeymoon is over for cloud computing. And basically what it did is, it went through and it sort of, took some perspective from some recent reports, from some industry analysts and some different people, and sort of tried to lay out, are we at a point where the premise of it is, building the cloud, at least for the three major cloud providers so far, has been really simple, really easy. They've had great growth, explosive growth in some cases, and, we're now seeing that it's becoming harder and harder for them to continue to do that. And so what I thought I would do is dive into the article a little bit. Keep in mind if you've been around the media, you keep up with media that goes on around tech. A couple of things you have to keep in mind. Number one, it's like every business is competitive, so they're trying to get eyeballs and clicks and all that sort of stuff. So sometimes you have to write headlines like this. But more importantly, sometimes there's some reports that come out, and we'll kind of highlight them in the second part of the show, that make some claims, that look at some things, and you do some, you connect a few dots in order to sort of satisfy a premise that you have. And so what I thought we'd do in this show is sort of look at what's laid out in this article. Does it have some validity to it? And if it does, what does that mean for those of us in the cloud computing industry? And maybe if it doesn't, have complete validity, we can poke some holes in it. Maybe where did they get it wrong? And I think that's oftentimes more important than sort of reading the article, getting angry about it, going and writing a tweet about it. But, looking at the data, looking at the trends, looking at the sort of the macro and the micro around this and figuring out, what's going on? Does this impact me? Should I be concerned about this? Should my business be concerned about this? So we're going to get to that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a cloud monitoring platform built by engineers for engineers, enabling full-stack observability for modern applications. Datadog integrates seamlessly to gather metrics and events from more than 450 technologies, including cloud providers, databases, and web servers. Easily identify slow-running queries, error rate bottlenecks, and move fast with built-in dashboards, algorithmic alerts, and end-to-end request tracing and log management. Datadog helps engineering teams troubleshoot and collaborate together in one place to enhance performance and prevent downtime. Start a free trial today, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Just visit datadog.com/cloudcast to get started. That's datadog.com/cloudcast. Today's show is sponsored by Teleport. Are you building cloud applications with a distributed team? Then check out Teleport, an open-source, identity-aware access proxy for cloud resources. Teleport provides secure access to anything running somewhere behind NAT, SSH servers, Kubernetes clusters, internal web apps, and databases. Already trusted by industry leaders, Teleport is a great solution for organizations that need to secure their infrastructure and comply with security best practices, such as role-based access control, preventing data exfiltration, providing visibility, and ensuring compliance. Download Teleport today at goteleport.com/cloudcast. That's goteleport.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to dig a little bit into this concept, this premise that was laid out in this article. The honeymoon is over for cloud computing. It was written by Business Insider 2 weeks ago. And it kind of it stands up on kind of three pillars, right? If there's sort of three legs to the stool, if you will. They're kind of based around these three premises. The first one was the article, I guess subsequent podcast or Clubhouse that was put out by Martine Casado and some of the folks at A16Z. I forget the woman's name who co-wrote it with Martine. I believe it was Sarah. Apologize for not having her name off the top of my head. It basically said, public cloud is, the cost of public cloud is a $100 billion sort of quote unquote tax or burden upon software companies. And because of that, high cost of using cloud computing, public cloud computing, we very well may see, a set of repatriation, a trend of repatriation back to on-premises data centers or co-locations or private clouds, whatever you wanted to call it, in order to, once you reach scale for large SaaS types of applications, maybe we begin to see repatriation happen. Right, and that article got a lot of press. We actually talked about it on a show. It's in the show notes a couple of months ago. I think back in April we talked about it on this show. Kind of the cost of repatriation, the cost of sort of better managing your spend in the cloud and so forth. But that was one of the pillars of this idea that, people are now recognizing how much the cloud costs. And, because more and more companies are using SaaS, the SaaS companies were probably going to, start to be more cost conscious as they scaled and begin to pull things back into the cloud. So that was sort of pillar number one. The second pillar of the article is a recent CIO survey that Morgan Stanley does. So Morgan Stanley, being one of the large investment banks, had gone out and talked to a large number of CIOs, as they frequently do. They're trying to gauge the market. They're trying to gauge spending trends and so forth. And a lot of it was kind of contextually around, now that we're kind of out of COVID, which, seems a little bit weird now that the Delta variant's back with us. But, it was kind of, okay, we're a year plus into COVID. Some new trends have emerged as to how you're going to spend, whether it's remote work or building applications for whatever. What does your spending outlook look like? What do you expect? How do you expect to spend? Where do you expect to spend? What sort of velocity do you expect to spend? And one of the things that one of the bigger kind of data points that came out of it was, compared to previous years, CIOs were saying, and again, this is CIOs of some of the largest companies, we expect to see us not put as much data and maybe applications into the cloud as we had thought to do in previous years. Right now, again, it didn't say that they weren't planning to use the cloud. It just said, given our awareness of, cloud usage patterns and some of the new patterns that we have to keep in mind, post-COVID or, phase 2 of COVID, however it was phrased, we don't expect to do as much in cloud as we had previously done. And so, again, this was sort of a data point that got a lot of people going, maybe we're at a point where all those up and to the right graphs and curves that we see for public cloud growth, maybe they're going to take a little bit of a dip. The third leg to this stool of the argument in this article was Gartner, analyst firm Gartner. Everybody knows Gartner from Magic Quadrants and so forth. They had done a recent, kind of state of the cloud, and one of their conclusions or one of their statements was, they were seeing more and more companies sort of getting away from this trend that they were going to be cloud first for all applications, right? So, for those of you who are newer to the industry or maybe don't follow this as much, we've gone through a few trends with cloud computing. We saw a hesitancy of using public cloud, and again, this was maybe a decade or so ago. And then, we went through kind of some trends of CEOs telling their company, we need to be a cloud company, we need to be a software company. We're not a pharmaceutical company, we're not an automotive company, we're a software company. Therefore, we need to be in the cloud. You saw that trickle down to a number of CIOs who, wanted to sort of satisfy the demands of their CEO and, align to the corporate strategy. And they were going to implement a cloud-first strategy. And what that cloud-first essentially meant was every spending decision that we make should first be looked at through the lens of using the public cloud, whatever that definition of public cloud meant. It could be SaaS, it could be IaaS, it could be whatever. But every decision that we make that involves technology going forward for things that are new, we should be using cloud first. We should be considering the public cloud first. And again, that drove behavior for a number of years in which people said, okay, maybe if it wasn't always the best decision, right? If it was the best decision, great. But maybe if it was sort of a borderline decision, we're still going to bias towards using the public cloud. And so all this article is sort of saying, the one from Gartner is, there is a little bit of a trend or a bias or a, call to action that maybe cloud first won't always be the overriding factor for the number of companies who kind of gave them feedback. So, you take these three things together and you go, okay, well, it wasn't one data point, it wasn't two data points, it was really 3 data points. And these come from sort of surveys of a lot of feedback from, talking to different customers in different industries. And, I think the takeaway from this, and this is sort of the premise of the article, and then there were some supporting quotes from various people in the industry, David Lithicum and others, that basically said, hey, it's harder and harder for the cloud providers to sell to customers, and customers are starting to have some second thoughts or some considerations that, hey, maybe the public cloud isn't as sort of panacea, unicorn as you thought it was. Like it's better technology, it's cheaper, it's faster. We're going to become a software company, and so that's the premise of it, right? And if you take that premise on its face value, that's fine, right? Like it's hey, we've reached a maturity of the industry in which a lot of the low hanging fruit maybe has been picked, if you will, and maybe things are going to become a little more challenging. So let's step back and kind of think about what this says. And again, this isn't a knock on the article. I was just sort of intrigued by this idea that, here's this headline and, let's step back and see, does it hold water? Is that where we are in our industry? Do we need to be concerned about this with our industry? If we sort of think about this in a little broader context, number one, the market for cloud computing is absolutely more competitive than it was 5 years ago, than it was 3 years ago, than it was 10 years ago. That's the natural evolution of every market, right? I think, for a while there, you used to have Andy Jassy, somewhat bragging, but also somewhat, kind of a little bit in awe. He used to say things like, I can't believe the rest of the IT industry or the rest of the large cloud providers have allowed us to gain such a lead in the marketplace. And they used to talk about having a 5-year lead and a 7-year lead. And this is, really a statement that, we used to hear from people like Simon Wardley, who used to say, I can't believe that HP or IBM or Dell or somebody else allowed AWS to do this, because that was their market, right? They basically came in and took their market for computing and storage and, basic database services. And so, obviously, we see very, very healthy competition. I mean, we see Microsoft from a revenue perspective, somewhere in the ballpark of what AWS does. We're seeing Google have, continuing to throw up larger and larger numbers every quarter. I think they've sort of sorted out their leadership challenges. Thomas Kurian seems to be really executing at a high level, even though they're kind of starting from a smaller base, but executing at a very high level. We're seeing the SaaS industry continue to grow. We've seen the open source industry sort of, go through various iterations of projects that we've seen things like Kubernetes evolve, and we've seen other, multi-vendor, multi-contributor things be very, very viable and drive things. We've seen acquisitions happen, right? We've seen IBM make huge acquisitions. We've seen VMware involved with, multiple acquisitions. So, we've seen transition happen. But, I think people have come to realize like you are going to compete in this space. This is how customers want to buy. So, the basic premise is that, it won't be as easy, quote unquote, to get to the gains that an AWS, Azure, or Google have done over the last 5, 6, 7 years. That's absolutely true. Now, the flip side of that argument is, I think if you talk to anybody who works at those companies or anybody who's even been part of these industry transitions over the last 8 to 10 years, 5 to 6 years, at the time, none of those felt easy, right? I mean, you were... Yes, maybe there weren't as many cloud competitors, right? There weren't as many, the incumbent companies didn't see what you were doing. You were sort of, we were building from the innovator's dilemma, sort of bottom up and so forth. But, the flip side of that is the companies, the AWSs, the GCPs, the ones in open source and people driving innovation, I mean, they were fundamentally trying to be the next paradigm for, change in our industry, right? They were trying to convince people that allowing somebody else to run systems or to allow your data to live somewhere outside of your data centers, to, spending in a completely different way, consuming in a completely different way. Those are all really, really big things. They're really hard things to convince people to do to make change, right? Change is always the hardest thing. So, I think the premise that it's way more competitive, completely valid. The premise that, there was a honeymoon period, I mean, there always are times when you've got the winds at your back, but that part I think is a little underestimated in terms of how challenging it is to get companies to adopt new things, to get people to try new things, especially when their careers are based on the things that they've got muscle memory and they've got experience doing. Now, we've also, if we put this in context, I think it's somewhat valid if we say, hey, we did a show a few weeks ago or a few months ago in which we looked at, is the public cloud growing fast enough? And my argument in that case was maybe not, right? Maybe it's, in terms of the overall size of IT, it's somewhere in the teens in terms of total amount. Maybe it's 20% at this point when you include all the, SaaS and IaaS and all that sort of stuff. And, we're a decade in, shouldn't it be growing faster, right? And so maybe the flip side of this, was this a honeymoon is, this is just the beginning. And we're going to see it, this is sort of we haven't even crossed the chasm yet for cloud computing. I think there's an argument to be made for that as well. So, I think you can look at it both this way and that way. I think we're going to begin to see, I think you could argue, and I think you can make a pretty good argument that we've not really yet crossed the chasm. We haven't yet reached the mainstream of like spending in the public cloud. And again, like I said, it's still in, the teens, maybe 20%. I think until we get to it being 30, 40, 50, 60% of that spend, is really where it becomes sort of mainstream. And I think maybe the parallel to this is for years we used to talk about Amazon being a powerhouse in retail, if you will. And yes, they essentially defined the market for e-commerce. But it's taken 20 years, right? I mean, like Jeff Bezos is now just retiring from Amazon after building a behemoth, and it's only now that they're beginning, they just surpassed Walmart as the largest retailer in the United States or in the non-China area. I mean that's a 20-year expansion, a 20-year type of thing, and now so I think there's some parallels there to what public cloud looks like versus all of IT if you put them in perspective. So we talked about it. We talked about I think the other thing to consider is there's been a lot of consolidation that's happened in cloud computing, right? We used to talk about the Gartner Magic Quadrant for like IaaS, if you will. I think there's sections of the market that have consolidated. So I think in the IaaS space, we've seen it consolidate down. The Magic Quadrant used to be 15, 18 companies. It's now 6 or 7. I think the last one was 7, inclusive of IBM, Oracle, Alibaba, and Tencent, as well as the 3 that we've talked about a lot. So there are parts of the market in which there are massive economies of scale that have consolidated, and you would expect this in every market. And the fact that there's 3 kind of big ones, or 4 or 5, is still sort of surprising. Usually consolidates down around 2, and I think we have seen probably more consolidation around Azure and AWS, although Google continues to see healthy growth, and where exactly that's coming from, it's not totally sure. They don't break it out. I would assume it's more around data products. They do an amazing job around machine learning and AI and data-centric services, database services. But we've also seen, because of that, just a massive explosion of the number of SaaS companies, SaaS services that are out there. And again, that's what happens when you've got this solid foundation underneath them. So, again, I think maybe, and keep in mind, when that happens, essentially, those infrastructure companies become, they get a piece. They get a piece of every bit of the SaaS business that goes on, right? So whether a SaaS company succeeds, grows, shrinks, the infrastructure companies get a piece of that. So all that's going on. I mean, we've seen, the cloud vendors have begun to eat into different parts of what's going on, right? And it's been a little weird and unusual and messy at times, and it's created some angst, especially like with the open source world. But it's also been something that's helped to accelerate their growth. So, again, is that a honeymoon issue? Maybe, right? Like maybe the honeymoon between, open source and the cloud is beginning to come to, a little more reality. Okay, fair. That's fair enough. Now, a couple of other things I think we need to think about. We really haven't seen any price wars between the cloud providers. I think what they've sort of done, obviously, if you've followed this for a while, you've seen, like AWS, one of their selling points early on was, hey, look, we're having price cuts. Hey, we've had a dozen price cuts. We've had 30 price cuts, 50 price cuts. And a lot of that was just them doing a really brilliant marketing job of, we're going to advertise our growing economies of scale. So, when we first got started, we had, 1 or 2 data centers or regions, and then we grew more, and we were able to buy more from the Intels of the world and the ARMs of the world. And they did a brilliant job of using that as a way to market to an industry in the IT industry who always felt like all the vendors ever did was raise their prices, right? So, whether it was with Oracle or Microsoft or IBM or whatever it was, it's kind of brilliant marketing of, doing what they do at scale, which was economies of scale, which eventually lower prices. But usually you don't hear about that necessarily. A lot of times the price lowering will happen, and the vendors will be able to leave their price the same. Oh, well, look, we've added more features, price is the same. AWS did a really good job of that, but we've not really seen any pricing wars per se between the cloud providers. They've essentially kind of reached a point where, because their pricing is more or less public, aside from, sort of major discounting, it's all out there. And so, we've really not seen any of them decide, I really want to take on more market share by, significantly cutting prices. I think because, they all realize that sort of, kind of the thing that we had with, we had in the past with nuclear weapons is sort of mutual destruction, right? You don't necessarily want to do that. And the other part is, more and more we're seeing, at least in the AWS case, not maybe as much in the Google case, and obviously it's becoming a growing part of the Azure case. It's a significant profit center for those businesses. And so the idea that you want to drive, lower profit acquisition of revenue maybe isn't in their best interest. And then the other part is, as we saw in COVID, when the pandemic happened, they don't have infinite amount of resources, right? So if situations occur, and this would probably occur if they dropped their prices and tried to create a price war, they can't build data centers and regions and availability zones fast enough, right? So to a certain extent, the physics of, physical locations, the reality of, the cost of building physical locations has kind of prevented massive, price wars. And typically in markets, you would have something like, sort of massive, some vendor would decide we're going to try and gain share through price wars. And then, at some point we have much more market share and therefore we get to keep more of the dollars. We haven't really seen that yet. And again, we may not see that necessarily happen because of the other context and dynamics of the importance of cloud computing, which started off in all three of the big three as sort of small parts of their business, and now has become significant parts of their profitability. And then they're all obviously constrained by data centers and so forth. The other piece of the flip side of that is, and Aaron and I have talked about this, I feel like a million times on the show, is all three of these companies are part of much, much larger businesses that have very, very large, I'll call them golden goose, profit centers, cash cows, right? And they really haven't completely started to leverage the value that the bigger parent companies can potentially bring to businesses as part of the cloud spend. I think if anybody has begun to do it more and more, it's probably visibly Google. Google has started to more and more as they're selling GCP, they're trying to talk about inclusion of engineering resources to help companies become more digitized. They become to say, hey, we can help your marketing organization. We can better help you with ad spend or marketing awareness or other things that will impact other parts of their business. I don't know that we've necessarily seen that with the other companies as part of a direct negotiation tactic or package in terms of selling AWS or Azure, but they haven't unlocked that yet. And their parent companies are massive, massive companies. Now, I don't know if that's just the culture of the companies. They don't feel like that's something they need to push. It may be that, again, all three of these companies to a certain extent and a few others are, being watched by antitrust, at least in the United States. And so they're hesitant about trying to be too visible about how much influence and power they have over swaying the market and so forth. But at the end of the day, they're all massive, massive companies. They have huge amounts of cash on hand that they could apply to these spaces. So, their ability to grow, their ability to influence, to leverage other parts of their business, to leverage, their cash flow, their ability to finance things for customers. I don't think we've really even scratched the surface of that. Now, those are the types of things that you do once maybe the low-hanging fruit or the honeymoon period is over. Okay, that's fine. But I feel like to a certain extent that the article kind of painted the clouds as if, well, they've sort of run out of steam and maybe we'll see them slow down and so on and so forth. I think what we've seen is just they've been able to drive more sort of straight line type of growth or straight line strategies, if you will. Now their strategies are going to have to get more involved, more complex, have multiple sort of arms and branches and things that are going to help them engage, differentiate, and make things successful. Now, another thing that happens, and we've seen this in other markets, I know I saw this when I worked at Cisco years and years ago, is you start to realize, okay, from a technology perspective, this is what we have to offer, but do we have enough people that can consume our technology, that understand what we do? And one of the things that we did back in the day when I was at Cisco was we created this idea of Cisco universities. And these were, training centers that were popped up all around the world. We engaged with universities, we engaged with high schools, we engaged with trade schools, and we were trying to create a de facto way that, hey, if you wanted to be in the networking part of IT or you wanted to be in IT, you should have a Cisco certification. You should learn the Cisco command line set. You should learn kind of the Cisco way of doing things. And there was an article this week that came out that Amazon is looking to train 29 million people, sort of the next generation. This is the kind of thing that you do when you've got a thing in place that's desirable. So we've seen working with lots of partners with CBT Nuggets and a Cloud Guru and plenty of others that we've worked with in the past, Cloud Academy and others. AWS certifications are very powerful, right? They have value to them. So we're beginning to see the cloud providers, look to extend their reach, not just for the immediate future, but the next generation of people that are coming up that are going to, hopefully, in their mind, in their world, in their business framework, prefer to work with them, because the people that know how to use this stuff have those skill sets. They're easier to hire. They can command greater salaries, all those sort of things. So, we're seeing all that going on, I think, and it lends itself to, lots and lots of growth ahead. But again, you're having to do some new types of heavy lifting, new types of engaging the market, new types of, ways of differentiating yourselves. And then I think the last piece of this is, I think for a long time, the question was always, if you were a customer, if you're an end user, whatever it might be, do you use the cloud or do you not use the cloud? It was sort of this binary, public cloud or not public cloud. And I think nowadays, whether you've looked at the HashiCorp State of Cloud report, or you've looked at, lots of other things, I think the realization that companies are using multiple clouds and they're still using their data center, right? So I think we're seeing the reality that it hasn't been, sort of cloud only versus not cloud. It's, multiple cloud, hybrid cloud, whatever term works for you. And I think we're beginning to see more and more sort of second generation technologies that are making that more and more possible, right? So, if you think about it, if you go back into the sort of the history of this, hybrid cloud, the term hybrid cloud, multi-cloud has been around, for 12, 13 years now, right? I was involved with it back in 2008, 2009. There were companies that were doing this. Technology's obviously evolved. We no longer have to think about the same hardware in both places. And, we evolved from things like VMs to containers. We're seeing, native services in the public cloud from lots of different vendors. So you're able to do migrations and so forth. And again, those are things that will encourage folks to be flexible in their architectures, and that flexibility may manifest itself in a private and public sort of hybrid cloud. It may manifest itself in multiple public clouds being part of your architecture, some standard technologies being used between them. Again, whether it's Kubernetes and containers or some other type of serverless thing or API management, whatever it might be. So I think if I kind of summarize this whole thing and wrap it all up here. I think these kind of articles, you can look at them as clickbait, but I think when I look at them, there's a reason why they get written, and I think it's useful to look at the context of, are we at a point in time in which, we should concern ourselves with, we're shifting from one phase to another. I think that's fair. I think the premise of it is, we are shifting from sort of one mode of how we engage the public cloud. Do we choose the public cloud? Which public cloud makes sense? And I think it's important to realize, what's the natural order of what happens when there's consolidation in parts of the market, there's expansion in other parts of the market. What are the dominant players in the market? What tools do they have at their disposal? And then, if you are part of their ecosystem, you buy from them, whatever it might be, what are some of the things that you can do to best take advantage of the trends as they're happening, whether they are at a technology level, at a people level, at a ability to impact your business level. So I think it's fair. I think at the end of the day, it's a fair article. I think it brings up a good discussion. I hope we sort of had a good discussion here. But I think it's something that you need to consider. Not so much, hey, is this doom and gloom? The honeymoon's over. But we're going to shift to a new phase of the game, of the strategy, of how the pieces are laid out on the board. And you want to be prepared for what that's going to mean. How's that going to impact you personally? How's that going to impact your teams? How's that going to impact your business? How's that going to impact, who you work with and how you work with them and so forth. So I think all those are good to think about. We'd love to kind of get your feedback. What did we get right? What did we get wrong in this synopsis, this Sunday perspective? But again, I think, coming out of a pandemic, we've said this on the show a number of times, right? What happens after a major global event, right? So we had one in 2001 with the sort of .com, the internet bubble burst. The rules changed, the game changed after that. After we had the major, financial market housing crisis meltdown in 2008, 2009. Perspectives changed. The game changed quite a bit. And this pandemic we just had in 2020 and into 21 is going to change things quite a bit. And it's important to sort of think about and stop sometimes and think about okay, what do we know for sure? what don't we know for sure, what are the stables, what are the constants versus the variables, and begin to sort of make your plans based on that, make your strategies based on that. So it's been fun to sort of dig into, what is this sort of what you would think of as a throwaway, meaningless article mean, but put it into some context. I think it's a good thought exercise. I'd encourage you to sort of think about it, and we'd love to hear your feedback. What do we get right? What do we get wrong? And what should we be educating ourselves as well, so we can help educate our community. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Kind of went a little longer than I expected, but that's okay. Sometimes it's good to be thinking about this in a big way. So with that, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the community. If you get a chance, tell a friend. Say, hey, we like listening to the show. Tweet it out. Let us know which shows you like. What other shows do you listen to beyond the Cloudcast? Maybe we need to kind of go and learn, and we'd love to sort of know more about what you need and want from us. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.